Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Eric Devin, Rich Allen, and Jeremy Smith. 6 games down, and we are really into the swing of things in Ligue. But who recovered from European heartache, and who is still eating tubs of ice cream? All of that and more after the latest headlines. Monaco made it no wins in their last 6 in all competitions as they continued their midweek hangover to draw 1-1 with Nîmes. Le Crocodile took the lead through Anthony Briancon before Radamel Falcao saved the Monegasques blushes, but they remain well off the pace. Early on Saturday, Lille moved into second as they won 2-1 against Nantes. Jose Font and Jonathan Ikone sealed the deal for the home side, with Le Canary now sat in the relegation playoff zone. In the multiplex, Strasbourg got back to winning ways with a 3-1 victory over Amiens, while Montpellier moved into the top 4 with a 1-0 win over Nice. Saint-Etienne earned a 2-1 win over Caen as they snapped their 4-game winless run, as both games between Reims and Dijon and Angers Toulouse ended goalless. On Sunday, Paris Saint-Germain eventually recovered from their Anfield defeat with a 3-1 win over Rennes. The home side went in front due to an Adrien Rabiot own goal, but Angel Di Maria answered on the stroke of half-time, and unlikely scorers Thomas Meunier and Eric Maxime Choupo-Moting sealed the 3 points for the league leaders. Later in the day, Guingamp remained pointless as Bordeaux ran out 3-1 winners, with 2 goals in the final 10 minutes, earning the win for Les Girondins and heaping more pressure on Antoine Kombouaré. In the final game of the weekend, Lyon came out on top against fellow Olympique side Marseille. A double from Bertrand Traoré sealed the deal for Les Gones, with Catalacar earning a red card late on. And that's all for now, but for all your latest news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this evening with that game this evening between Olympique Marseille and Olympique Lyonnais. Eric, a great 4-2 win for the side that has real momentum behind them all of a sudden after a shaky start to the season. A good result midweek is followed by an even better one potentially, at least for their league prospects. This evening as well, they closed the gap and they actually on goal difference would have gone. Had G not scored that final goal, would have gone above Marseille, but nonetheless an important result and much needed one for Bruno Genesio's side in Ligue 1 terms.
Yeah, I think it certainly is good for Lyon to sort of shake off the malaise they've had lately domestically. I think that stunning performances from Traoré, I think, who reacted really well to being dropped for that match at City, had a great performance. Great match from Tanguy and Ndombele as well. But I don't know. I still think this match says more about how poor Marseille are defensively, particularly Caleta-Car, than it does about how good Lyon were. I think, Lyon, as they so often do this season rather, relied more on individual brilliance than any, particular style of cohesive play. Again, Ndombele had a lovely pass for, I believe, Traoré's second. But I still feel that there's not a whole lot of cohesion at Lyon attack. Marseille, on the other hand, I think are looking very, very foolish. I think it's clear that Caleta-Car, it may have this experience with Croatia, but is not at a Ligue 1 level. I mean, that challenge on Traoré was horrendous. His positioning was poor as well. Before he was sent off, I think that Marseille, we shouldn't be under any illusions. Their stated aim is not to do well domestically, to shake off this poor against the top sides league that they've been stuck with in Ligue 1. And that the rotations that they'd made in midweek, ahead of this match, that is, speak volumes about what their intent is. And then to come and concede 4, again, the absences of Rami and Orlando are a factor in this. We shouldn't fool ourselves, but the fact that they were so well beaten by a Lyon who weren't playing incredibly well, certainly not at the level they had been midweek, is a really disappointing result for Les Olympiens.
Yeah, and it's a mixed bag, this one, really, Rich. I mean, Lyon obviously played really well midweek and continued at least scoring-wise this evening. And one player I wanted to pick out who has slowly grown into this side over the course of a year and a couple of weeks at least anyway, in Bertrand Traoré, grabbed a nice double today, including the first goal. Yes, the second goal is deflected, but another solid game for him as he slowly and surely builds into a real nice player for Lyon.
Yeah, he absolutely does. I think there were concerns last season over consistency. I think especially when they had him, Diaz and Depay, all three, playing up front. I think certainly it's noticeable how hard he works. I think compared to someone like Depay, I think Depay is capable of superb moments, but still has those consistency issues. I think Traoré deserves a lot of credit for really knuckling down. He works so hard for that team. He does look at tracking back now. I don't think that was something that was particularly strong for him last season, but he is working hard on that. He's adding goals now on a fairly regular basis. He's looking a real threat down that right wing. But the fact that obviously he was dropped for the game against Man City, and obviously Maxwell Cornet came in and did so well, it's just highlighting, I think, just that Genesio has these options. You know, we saw the depth and the quality of the players coming off the bench for Lyon. And it's things like that, I think, that hammer home the point with Marseille, that they've still got a long way to go. But Bertrand Traoré is a fine example of Genesio working with a player, recognising that there is a good player there, a really good player there, that needed to work hard on consistency, needed to work hard on being relevant in the game throughout the 90 minutes where possible. And we're now starting to see that pay dividends, I think.
And another great performer, and he had a great time out in midweek as well. Jez, is Tanguy Ndombele. I really like that, even with Pape Diop in there as well, that Lyon have a little bit more depth, but the big occasion always seems to call for an Ndombele, and yet again he impresses.
Yeah, we've talked numerous times about how in the last year Marseille have done okay against the teams that you'd expect them to do okay against, and then in the big matches, Day and certain of their bigger players don't turn up. Ndombele, certainly this season, has arguably been the opposite. He didn't really do too much the first few weeks of the season, and then in the last half week or so, in Lyon's biggest two matches of the season so far, he's stepped up several levels and been the player that we saw so often last year. Again, in the big matches, I think I've said before, for me, he was man of the match in 3 matches against PSG last season. And you know, he really can do it all. And you know, I just put on Twitter, but a lot of other people have as well. With Tolisso now having a long-term injury, there is a place up for grabs in the France squad. Rabiot, I suppose, in theory, is the favourite, depending on how Deschamps decides to kind of react to the snub in the summer. But Ndombele, with those performances in those big matches, is putting himself right up there as a candidate, and he really can do it all. I mean, he's proper box to box, can defend, can ping those fantastic long passes, as Eric said, for Traoré's goal, for example. It was almost an identical pass to the one from which Depay hit the post against City. He's got a fantastic long shot, which if I had to criticise anything about him, I'd say maybe he doesn't try his luck a little bit more often. But he is just, I think, already a more or less complete player. And you know, Lyon are spot for choice in some of those midfield positions, and you could argue that the team could be built around 2 or 3 players. But if Ndombele stays there for a year or two, which frankly is unlikely with the city money that's already been offered for him last summer, you know, Lyon really could build a team around him.
Yeah, and that's probably the worry, is keeping everyone else's mitts off of him. Really, he's certainly turning into Mr. Big Time. It seems like every time there's a big occasion, you can expect Ndombele to perform. Let's expand on what you were saying earlier, really, Eric. That again, Marseille's sort of worrying defensive trends start popping up again. That they didn't have the greatest of times on Thursday either, against 10 men, still going down to a 2-1 defeat to Eintracht Frankfurt, and then they head into this game knowing that a win would be absolutely enormous for them, and they don't get the job done. They had some exciting moments going forward, but again, like you say, there's a lot of worries about their depth, especially defending wise as well.
Yeah, I mean, Payet and Thauvin were great. I think that there's no doubt for anybody who's watched this Marseille club. Dimitri Payet, I think was frustrated at the back end of last season with that injury he picked up, causing him to miss out and playing for France. But I think, perhaps not to the level he was at West Ham, but he's certainly playing as well as he has since before leaving for Marseille. He had a pretty strong match, but defensively they're really a shambles. I mean, perhaps Pelé could have done better with the second goal. I want to say that it beat him in his near post, but he's generally a pretty reliable keeper, and we know Stefan Danda is as well. But I think that there's no way to legislate for the injuries again that Rami and Orlando have suffered. But I really have to question Rui Garcia's judgment in putting out Caleta in a match of this magnitude, given how poorly he played in his previous appearance against Nîmes. And he was done over time and again by Dupre and by Tube in that match. And I think that we have a similar types of players playing for Lyon. The likes of Fekir, the likes of Aouar, players who are very, very good on the ball, relatively quick, but also have a pretty good upper body strength. I think that's what's really lacking with Caleta-Car's game. He's poor positionally, but he also is very poor physically, and I think that allows teams who want to control the ball and work in tight spaces to really have their way against him. I don't know whether Rui Garcia doesn't see Kamara as an answer. I think Kamara has always impressed me to a decent enough level. I'm not sure why he's not being given more of a chance. I know he plays, I believe, as a left back in midweek, but I think his future is certainly there as a center back. So I don't think there are any easy answers from Marseille in this regard, but I think that Frank McCourt needs to dig into his pocket again. And, if the imminent returns of Orlando, he's perhaps able to play midweek, and Rami don't get this defense playing the way that they need to. It's a frustrating development on my end. I feel that strong Marseille is a good indicator of a strong Ligue. I even as a Lyon fan, I enjoyed seeing them make that run to the Europa League final last season. It just seems that they've really constructed this team in a way that leaves them a little bit more vulnerable than they would perhaps like to be. Now, I'm not saying you're supposed to legislate for injuries to Rami and Orlando, but I believe both of them are 33 this year. So to rely on a pair of center backs that are of that age, and to do it seems like a pretty poor job in bringing in depth in that position is just a really frustrating development, and I think that it's going to continue to limit Marseille's top three ambitions.
Jez, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that it is a big blow, and you can have sympathy for Marseille that two of their centre backs are injured, but there's been certain positions that everyone knew were problem positions for Marseille for at least a year. Well, I mean, certainly over the summer, but probably for a good year now. And when the centre back is one of those positions, and when your probably first choice backup centre back is your best midfielder, which means that you're taking arguably your best player out of his in the whole team out of his best position, and weakening another very important position by making him play somewhere that he's not entirely accustomed to. You're sort of doing yourself down in two ways. It's like a double whammy. And whether that's McCourt's fault or Garcia's, or personally I'd suggest Errol, who seemed to have spent too much of the summer picking fights with Lyon Nice and forgetting to actually do his job. Marseille were always going to be vulnerable to something like this happening if they had a couple of defensive injuries. to be fair, Lyon are as well, because I don't think they did a great job in terms of bringing centre backs either. But you run that risk, and Marseille have fallen foul of it.
Yeah,
I think you look at the squads then as well, especially tonight, and you look at the fact that from beating Manchester City, Lyon made 2 changes. They brought in Leo Dubois, they brought in Bertrand Traoré, and that is not weakening the team. Arguably going forward, I think it's probably strengthening the team. And then you look at the substitutions that were made. You know, Lyon could bring on Lucas Toussaint, Martin Terrier, and Moussa Dembele, whereas Marseille were having to bring on Boubacar Kamara, Clinton Ng, and Valère Germain. And I think that really just highlights that as a starting 11, yet Marseille team is pretty strong, but even that starting 11 still has its weaknesses. And then there is a real lack of depth in that team. And it may be that comes. It may be that this project is not a go out and bring in a load of players. It's go out and bring 1 or 2 players in each transfer window, which seems to be the case. But if you're going to do it that way, you've got to accept you're not going to get particularly immediate results. And you're going to have performances like this against the bigger teams where arguably, I think, certainly 3 of the 4 goals, there were noticeable Marseille defensive errors. Jordan Amavi, I thought, had a terrible game at left back. I don't think Gustavo is a particularly good centre back, but as has been said by Eric and Jez, it's a square peg round hole, because ultimately he's going to have to do there, because they really do struggle elsewhere. But there was just silly mistakes, and there have been, I think, certainly the first part of this season that has carried through from last season, silly mistakes that can easily be eradicated. You know, we saw Morgan Sanson give the ball away in the first half that led to that Memphis Depay effort that should have gone in. We saw a silly penalty given away by Strootman. There was absolutely no need to take Traore's legs away. Amavi allowed Traore to run into the box time and time again throughout that game, and just left him to run around in that box by himself. So there's basic mistakes there that can be ironed out. It doesn't necessarily need new players. It needs Garcia to really be hammering those players in training to get rid of those mistakes. Get rid of those mistakes, and maybe Marseille go away from that game tonight with a draw. And all of a sudden, we're having a completely different conversation. It's a completely different feeling. And actually, you know what? That's a good result for Marseille. As it is, it's a bit of a hammering. You know, they've had a man sent off. They've finished with 9 men. It's doom and gloom. But it really doesn't need to be for Marseille, because they're making so many mistakes that their own doing.
Yeah, let's not be too hasty yet. We have to remember that these 2 teams are still on the same points, and both have had rough starts to the season, but we'll see how it goes on from there. And at least 1 point for VAR tonight, at least after a couple of missteps. On to another entertaining game from today, and that involved 2 other sides that were involved in European action, and that's Rennes versus Paris Saint-Germain. It was an entertaining affair at the Rosanne Park, and a pretty good start for Rennes as well in this one, Eric. They got a good result in midweek, albeit Jablonec gave them a little bit of a test, and it took some while to finish them off at least. But despite the result, that first half an hour for Lemouchi will be real positive. In fact, you may even push that to the first 45 minutes until Di Maria grabs a goal. Rennes were more impressive.
Yeah, you know, I really... James Leia-Saliki, I think, you know, was really the catalyst in a lot of this for me. I was surprised to see Bourgeot played in a more narrow role. Saliki played wide on the left, but he was really impressive. Overlapping runs there. He had tucking inside, allowing Ben Sebaini to get forward. Grenier looked good as well. Yeah, I think this is a great match for Rennes. I think they were perhaps, you know, unlucky not to be ahead, but or ahead at the interval. Really a moment of brilliance there from Di Maria. But yeah, this is really positive. I mean, it's frustrating to not get the result, but I think that given the gutsy performance they played to get that win midweek, and to come back and to play with a level of drive and determination, and not really stop, even against the motivated PSG, who had a lot on the line themselves after having lost to Liverpool. It says a lot for Rennes. I think this team's going to continue to challenge for the top 3, top 4 this season. They clearly have depth. I mean, we talked about Liam being able to bring players off the bench, but to be able to bring Ben Arfa, Sibat Cheo, given his scoring record, I know he's yet to really hit his stride in Ligue 1, and Romain de Castillo, to have them come off the bench, I think is a lot. There's a lot there too. I mean, then you have a player like Faitou Mouassa, who again, could be more exciting, but I'm sorry, no, I take that back. He's been loaned out. But I think the point still stands that Rennes have good depth, and this is a side that I think we should keep an eye on, even if they do struggle a little bit in Europe.
And Rich, from your point of view as well, obviously, as a fan, I felt like in the first half an hour that they controlled the game well, they kept possession well. That only has to be a positive, even if you end up on a losing side against someone who really should be beating every team in Ligue 1, really, with the money they spend. But Rennes should take huge positives in the fact that they were able to not just play well in that first half, but even control game and control the ball and really not just frustrate, but outplay Paris Saint-Germain.
They did. I think they absolutely dominated that first 44 minutes. It was arguably the best football that we've seen from Rennes this season. Time and time again, we've said with PSG that if you as an opponent to them go into a game and from the first whistle you go out and you are expressive, you are attack minded, you can cause PSG problems. Too many times I think teams go into those games, as the cliche goes, and they feel that they've already lost the game. And that's when it turns into a bit of a walk in the park for PSG. Rennes, at least in this game, really came out of the traps fast. They had their chances. Obviously they got a fairly early goal through the Rabiot own goal, but Niang looked a real handful up front. Leah Saliki had one cleared off the line by Marquinhos. As I say, they had the chance. Ben Sebaini in the second half had a chance that Buffon did well to turn around the post. Rennes look good. They have started to put together some phases in games now where it is of quality that you could almost put in that top 4 bracket. What Rennes now need to do, of course, is stretch that out from phases in games to entire games. If they can get to that level, then we're really talking about something really exciting with Rennes. I think it's quite a harsh scoreline. I don't think Rennes deserve to lose 3-1. I don't think PSG particularly deserve to win 3-1. I think again, what we could look with PSG is how good and perhaps underrated Thomas Meunier is at right back. He got 2 assists. He grabbed a goal. He's such an important player that so many PSG fans give consistent stick for the sort of OM faux pas, shall we say, last season. But he is such a good player for them, such an important player for them, both going forwards and covering in defence. But all in all, from a Rennes perspective, it seems strange to sit here and say there's a lot of real positives to take from this game, despite losing 3-1. But that's the truth. This is against the champions. This is against the team who will win the league this season fairly comfortably again, I'd imagine. And they really did cause them some major problems. So I think it's important that Rennes can take that and then move forward. Obviously, we've now got a run of far more straightforward games in the next few weeks. And if that kind of performance and that level of performance can be carried through, then there's a good chance that they'll find themselves further up the table than they actually are right now.
And heading on to the team that did actually win the game, really, Jesse, it is Paris Saint-Germain. But at the same time, we'd mentioned previously about them this season in games against Nîmes, in the game against Guingamp, and it causes to light here, especially now they've lost that game at Anfield and really 3-2 flattered them, if anything. The warning signs are still there for them, aren't they? They're sometimes a little bit lackadaisical, especially in these first halves of games. They're having to sort of snap themselves out of almost a sleep paralysis, it feels like sometimes. And the worry is that, much like it did at Anfield, it's going to bite them in the backside. Maybe not in Ligue 1, but in their aspirations of Champions League. They can't afford to keep doing that when they're facing much stronger sides.
You're right, but I guess it all depends what your expectations are for PSG this season. And I think they had such a bad transfer window. I think it's ridiculous. Obviously, with the players they've got on their day, they can beat anyone. But for anyone to suggest that they're genuine contenders for the Champions League this season is, I think, ridiculous. I don't think they're even close to one of the best teams or squads out there, even if they've got maybe 2 or 3 players who could get into any of those other teams. I don't think that they're strong enough overall. On that basis, if you think of this as more of a transitional season, which I know a lot of people struggle to do, probably Al Khalifi first of all, but I still think he knows absolutely nothing about football, and that's part of the problem here. And certainly the English press will continue to sort of suggest that they're candidates just in order to be able to then knock them down again. But realistically, I don't think they are. And therefore, I think this season could just be a good, fun season, watching PSG, watching some of these younger players get more experience, watching Tuchel play around with the team. Even today, changed formation, I think, maybe 3 times during the match. Hopefully, in a sense, to make them more likeable, they will have a couple of very poor performances and a couple of fun defeats. If what I say is true and it is a transitional season, for them to absolutely dominate the league again would be all the more depressing. But I think it could be fun just watching Tuchel work his team out, work his squad out, work with the resources he's got, which it sounds ridiculous to say, but to an extent, they are kind of limited resources. He's been limited by the fact that whoever's fault it is, he has no defensive midfielder. He has very little defensive cover. He still doesn't really have a top-class left back. So he does still have dilemmas and things to work out. Again, not so much in Ligue 1, but certainly in Champions League. So possibly for the first time in a while, if the expectations of PSG on the European stage are lowered, they could be fun to watch. And to be fair to them today, it was definitely the first time they've been challenged this season. We thought maybe Saint-Etienne would do it last week, but as usual, they sort of went down with a whimper. All credit to Rennes for going for it, and as Rich kind of said earlier, Rennes and I'd say Nîmes as well are the only ones who've kind of not shown PSG respect, and they're the ones that have come closest probably to beating them. If other teams do that, then I think PSG can be got at, but also it will really give us a chance to see what Tuchel and his team are made of, how they can sort of combat maybe going behind a little bit more often, or combat teams who just approach playing them in a different way.
And Eric just makes a good point there, where they obviously had to sort of move on with a lineup at Anfield. They obviously were able to play a little bit more expressive midfield against Rennes, but at the same time, they were frustrated in the first half. They were giving the ball away in the middle. Verratti doesn't look quite fit. Rabiot didn't have the best of games really. Di Maria obviously scored the goal, but he is much more of an attacking influence on this midfield. Is it still a cause of concern for you there, even with Verratti coming back? They obviously don't really have a defensive midfield, but at the moment, none of that midfield other than Di Maria is really convincing.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I think it's frustrating. Again, like both Jeremy and Rich have mentioned, I really question how this team is being built. I mean, Juan Bernat, yeah, he played for Bayern Munich, but he's worse than Kurzawa at this point. I think he had a couple really nice crosses, but he's lost defensively. He's too easily overpowered. He couldn't deal with Sarr at all in the night. I think in midfield, again, having Verratti back to full fitness when that does happen is a good thing. But again, for all Verratti's talents, I mean, how many matches he missed through having a knock, through a pulled this, a strained that, accumulation of yellow cards. He's not a player you're going to get more than maybe 30 matches out of, I think, at his best in the season. And I don't think that perhaps even he's a player around which you could build a side. Rabiot is playing again as a makeshift defensive midfielder, not a position in which he's comfortable. I don't think he's all getting enough in the tackle. I don't think he has the physical nous to play there, the physical nous and strength to play there either. I think if this project really needs to succeed, they have the individual talent in attack. Neymar had a handful of really good passes that helped decide the match, but I think on the evidence of what we've seen tonight, there's still so much work for this PSG side to do, which, considering where this team could have been given the money that they've invested in the past 8 years, I think is unacceptable. There's really no other word to describe the situation in which they find themselves at this point in time. They've brought through some wonderful young players. Rabiot can be good on his day. I really like Kimpembe. His passing ability and defensive strength are fantastic. Ariel looks to be improving as a keeper. Meunier, maybe is the best right back in the world at this point in time. But I think by and large, PSG's scattershot transfer policy has just left them up a creek, and it's frustrating to see.
Yeah, and the worry, Rich, for me at least, I thought in this one, especially in that first half, was defensive frailties. I don't quite know what Marquinhos was doing on some of the bits, and there was a bit of flailing around from him. And as Eric mentioned, Juan Bernat has not solved that left back problem as they thought it would be. Give a little bit of a pass to Thomas Meunier, who had a decent game, but it feels like this squad still needs some work on it too. Get to that stage, and maybe do you try some of these youngsters that they've tried earlier, and Soki and the like, who have done reasonably well? Do they maybe out of the back of this get some more game time?
I think they have to. I think when we saw the opening few games of the season, and we saw that Tuchel was giving the likes of Nsoki, was giving the likes of Weah and Nkunku game time from the start, I think we all felt, well, this is great. This is what we've been wanting to see from PSG for so long. Obviously, then in the build-up to the Champions League, he brought his senior players back in, which is understandable in the preparation for it, and then they obviously put in the performance that they did in the Champions League. I'd like to see some of those youngsters brought back in. I think it's important that in the league, certainly they are given their opportunities. Ultimately, certainly I don't think Nsoki and I don't think Weah and Nkunku have done anything wrong to warrant being taken out of the team. As I say, this is league focus. So I'd want to see them come back in. And Nsoki is at best no worse than Bernat, and actually is probably at the moment, I think, probably slightly better than Bernat. So why not play him? Why not give him game time? Why not give him the experience in the league? Nkunku rarely seems to let the team down. No matter what position he's called upon to play, his sort of bit part that he does. And Weah, when he's come on, he's looked a real danger, a real handful up front. Today was another example of Cavani having an off day in front of goal. He was finding it difficult to create space. His first touch was pretty hopeless. We saw that short corner routine where he played the ball back and just ended up clearing it into touch. It wasn't a good game from him. And you just felt that, if he'd have got someone like Weah, who has got a bit more pace about him, perhaps a bit more movement, I think, it could have been a little easier. I think some of those chances that were semi-created for Cavani, you might have seen Weah create, and actually hit the target at the very least. So I'm hoping that they do get given chances. It was a promising start to the season to see so many being given. I mean, I've only named 3 there, but I think there was, I forget which game it is, but I think they finished with 6 or 7 players on the pitch under the age of something like 21, which is great. It's really, really good to see, because we've been wanting this for so long from PSG, because they do have, through all the money that they spend, they do have an excellent academy. And unfortunately, we only ever see it when players leave the club and go on to perform really, really well. So to see players coming through, it's a real positive sign. And I think it's important for a club like PSG that they maintain that link to the local area by having these youngsters who were born and raised in Paris and the suburbs around the city, that they can see that they have the opportunity to grow within the academy and are then given first team opportunities and can break through. And just because they are spending ludicrous sums of money on players, that doesn't mean the likes of your Stanley and Sockies can't come into that team, make an impact, and who knows, eventually become first choice left back for the club.
That's something that I sort of got quite worked up about during the week after the Liverpool defeat, after certain journalists who I think for the most part are very good kind of questioned what's the point of the PSG project, which really annoys me, particularly seeing as City, whose project is almost identical in absolutely every single way, always seem to get a free pass. They absolutely have made huge mistakes. I tend to agree with what Eric said, that some of the problems that are still there after 8 years are unacceptable. But this is the first time that I do feel that there's even if it's sort of been forced upon them by their own mistakes, bringing in Neymar and Mbappe and hamstringing them for all future transfer activity for a while. I do feel like this season there's a little bit more direction, a little bit more sensible thinking, and this really could, if they can get this balance right of stars and very, very talented youth, then it could be an exciting time, but also I think importantly a much more likable team. It's all very well selling Jordan shirts and opening shops in China where they're gonna sell lots anyway, but whatever they profess, in terms of money and notoriety, the most important things I think are first of all to win more trophies on the continental stage, and secondly, I think to become not the team of choice, but to get neutrals. And by neutrals, I don't mean people who are just attracted by Nike and Jordan, but people who know about football, and may just randomly switch a match on and make PSG likable to those people. I think the whole thing is a virtuous circle, and I think this is the first time that they're making some moves towards that. And so, the project has at times been misguided, as I said. So has City's, very much so. PSG sometimes get too much stick, sometimes not enough, but it is often deserved. But I do feel like they're changing tack a bit, and if they can keep that going, if people like Maxwell maybe can get a little bit more of a say over things rather than El Khelaïfi and Enrique, for example. Frankly, and I know that at least one other person on this panel would agree with me, if they get rid of Neymar, then I think a lot of things could start going very much more in PSG's favour.
You would think if, as a smart business move, it would be to invest in an academy and create your own stars rather than having to spend all that money in creating to buy them outright. It would save them a lot of money in the long run. But hey ho, let's hope that Tuchel's youthful revolution, at least in part, it continues for the rest of the season, especially when all the other club competitions start rolling themselves round as well. On to our next team tonight, and someone that's causing us a bit of concern, really. After 6 games, it's no points, nil points on the board for Guingamp, and we've mentioned them a couple of times already, Eric, but it's now that the regret and the worry starts setting in after the international break. We thought, well, okay, maybe they might turn a corner. Again, they faced a side that is toiling after a poor result in Slavia Prague, and something that Adam described as pretty much atrocious, really, on that game. But Guingamp get beat relatively comfortably 3-1, although obviously 2 goals came towards the end of the game. Is it time to start pressing the panic button from Antoine Kombouaré?
I think I don't know how much of this delayed the feet of Kombouaré. I feel like he's shown a good reputation for improving younger player. I think that we've seen how Marcus Thuram has come on this season has been really impressive. I think Ludovic Blas played really well in stretches. Marcus Coco is another story, but again, Guingamp didn't really seem to have done the right thing in terms of the transfer market. And Ronnie Rodlan, he was great for Caen, but I don't think that this team is best suited to having him play that style, be so ball dominant. I think you need a player with a little bit more, I don't want to say trickery, but intelligence to their game than he. The other players they brought in, Uniac Pakoto, Piri, even Frank Tabano. I'm just not really impressed by this club's transfer policy. I know they're working on limited means, as being a very small club, historically speaking. I know we're sort of used to them being in Ligue 1 and even in the Europa League a few seasons ago. But this is still a club of very humble origins, of not a very rich history. And I don't think 0 points is acceptable, but I do think that perhaps what we're seeing is just, a dose of reality. Is you have the players upon whom they relied upon so heavily. You look at the likes of Kerbra, Sorbonne, Mustafa Diallo, or older. Mustafa Diallo left. I think that Jimmy Briand departed too. I think he was really instrumental in keeping them sort of afloat in the past couple of seasons since he had joined. I think there's really a sort of a changing of the guard here, and that Guingamp are probably going to go down this season, and it's going to be a result of just a reality check. I don't think it's necessarily Camboare's fault. I mean, maybe the playing squad could be structured, but I mean, you look at someone like Etienne Dito, again, a fantastic player, but 36, 35 at this point. You're relying on players or Sobron who are at the very, very end of their career, or players that are frightfully young. And there's not, to me, enough players who are reliable and experienced enough in that middle area that are going to allow this team to kick on. And Benazet is in that bracket, for example, but his injury history is all too well known. But I think it's a number of factors, but I think it's not terribly unsurprising.
Do you think that was the mistake this summer, Rich? Eric's briefly touched on it then, that there's a number of experienced players gone out of the squad, like Mustafa Diallo, Jimmy Briand obviously left as well. I'd possibly add, although to a slightly slender degree, Clement Grenier leaving as well, obviously to head to Rennes as well, although he was out of contract anyway. They're hard players to replace, not just for quality, but also for that experience. And a lot of these young players are looking at each other thinking that they're trying to look at a slow black line that we always worried about, really, with those two older centre-backs as well, that all of these are combining into something that Camboire is, at the moment, at least unable to fix.
Yeah, it's as Eric was saying, it's a pretty old rickety defence, certainly in central defence. It's then a pretty old rickety midfield. And then it's a strike force that is pretty reliant on at the moment, Marcus Thuram, who, he's still very young, but I would not really put him in the consistent source of goals. And I wouldn't necessarily be looking to rely upon him as my source of goals to keep my team up. I think losing Briand and losing Grenier were huge blows in the summer. Grenier, I think they perhaps could have prepared for a little better. He was obviously a brilliant source of creative play in that midfield, which is severely lacking this season. And Briand was fairly guaranteed to get you, 10, 11 goals, 9, 10, 11 goals, which for a team of what Guingamp will be aiming for would be enough. And you then build in the sort of work rate that Briand added to the team, and with his experience that he was able to G up the rest of the team. He was a valuable player, and I think to lose him, admittedly in circumstances they wouldn't have liked to. They obviously agreed that he could go, basically providing that he went over to the MLS to Montreal. That didn't happen, and Bordeaux pounced, and Guingamp were not happy bunnies about it, but they had to deal with it. They obviously brought in Nolan Roux, who last season, brilliant. Seasons before, not so much. And it seems at the moment he's just being starved of service. Last season he thrived because he had a player like Dosovi providing excellent crosses and excellent balls into him that he could finish. And with a lack of creativity in that Bordeaux team, it's pointless having Nolan Roux almost in your team, because you're not going to get the ball up to him in the way that he wants it to be played into him. I think you're looking at some of the youngsters like Ludovic Blah, like Marcus Koch. I don't think necessarily have kicked on as well as we might have hoped. A couple of seasons ago, they were seen as some real bright prospects. I think they've perhaps just slightly stagnated. They've got plenty of time on their side, of course, but Guingamp don't have that time on their side. They really need to be, hitting their stride now, which they don't seem to be week in, week out. So I think there's a lot of problems here for Guingamp, and I think the main one for me is that creativity in midfield. You look at the midfield that they put out today. Marcus Coco said not overly consistent. They have Benazet. I'm not convinced by him. You had Etienne Dido, great servant, but again, he's probably beyond what I'd be looking to rely upon. And then Fofana, who again is okay, but he's not going to be, he's not a player that can unlock defenses. You don't have that player in that midfield that's capable of doing that perhaps someone like Grenier did last season. I think the one thing to say in Guingamp's favour is I think they've been very, very unlucky with some of their results. I think you look at some of the games that they've played this season. I thought today's game was a prime example of that. Again, I thought 3-1 was very harsh on them. I thought by and large Guingamp played pretty well, but just unfortunately couldn't finish their chances. I think you can say the same certainly in that first half against Marseille last week. I thought they played really well, and then obviously just tired and were victims of Marseille finally clicking in the second half. And then go back even further then to week 2. I thought again they put in a pretty strong performance against PSG, but just came off the back of a couple of perhaps harsh decisions against them. But things that luck will change. That bad luck can't run through the entire season. But they've now got 2 huge games coming up. They're away at Nîmes during the week, and then away at Angers at the weekend. You've got to be looking. Guingamp now have to be looking at taking points probably from both of those games, and really one of those needs to be 3 points. If we now hit October and they are still without a single point, we're in sort of danger of panic, and this could be a relegation come mid-March, for example. So it's 2 huge games. Today was a big game, but it's against a team that have very much underachieved. They're now coming up against teams who, at the start of the season, probably had points penciled against them. So it's really, really important now that Guingamp can recognise where they have performed well, string that together for a longer period of time, and then just hope that the luck runs in their favour as well. But 2 big games coming up.
Yeah, and the worry coming in, Jez, at least with those 2 games, is against especially like an Nîmes side that do like to play attacking football, and Guingamp have had a terrible defensive record so far, at least minus 13 goal difference as well. They're 4 points behind Amiens, who are just above them at the moment, 5 behind Nantes, and 6 towards full safety already. Are there 2 worse teams in Ligue than Guingamp? Do you start fearing, even at this early stage, for the future?
A bit of both. I do fear for them because it's been such an awful start, and I think it's very hard to turn these kind of bad runs around. But they can take a little bit of heart, I guess, from Nancy, for example, who got their first win of the season in Ligue 2 on Friday night, after having lost 7 in a row, not even having scored in any of them. And as Rich said, I think that there are some positives to take out of some of the matches that they played so far. And you look at the teams they've played, generally, not in every case, but generally they have been, 2 or 3 of the top teams like Lille, who, they're well beaten, but Lille are having a very good start to the season. So, yeah, it's not entirely their fault that it's all gone against them. I think Saliba is a huge miss. I know he played the first 3 matches, but I think he was a little bit of a talisman for them. Certainly, Briand, when he left, I was surprised that, not that he left, but I was surprised that when he went to Bordeaux that they were so upset about it, to kind of think, all right, maybe he's a 33-year-old gentleman, he's probably past it now, but clearly he was very important to them, it turns out, on and off the pitch. So there is going to be an adjustment period when you lose 2 or 3 of your main playmakers, or like I said, talisman from last year. So I do think they can turn it around, but they certainly need to do it, literally in the next match or 2, because against teams that you'd expect to be possible co-candidates for the drop, that they are already 6-pointers, and it's not just that they should they lose them or not get, you have to say maybe 4 points from them, and they're 2 tough away games. Not only will they be, still in that kind of, whirlpool of a sort of downward spiral, but they're also giving these supposed rivals, for relegation rivals, extra points to push further away from them. So it's a tough job, because it really is emergency situation now. But if they can get something from these games, then I think they can sort of push on, and on paper I do think there's at least 2 teams that are worse than Guingamp this season, but matches aren't won on paper.
That's always the worry, isn't it? Like I say, if only you could play the Minnesota Football Manager style, maybe they'd be a little bit more successful. And 17 goals conceded in 6 games, and none of them really being thrashings really either, although 4-0 against Marseille. The rest of them is not been able to keep the team to 1, never mind a 0 yet.
But you could say, just sorry, very quickly, that as Eric said about Lyon earlier, that they're sort of relying on individual moments rather than great teamwork. In a way, Guingamp have been a few times, it's not an excuse, but they have a few times been undone by individual moments rather than teamwork as well, which is just a little bit of bad luck. I think, Marseille, there were 2 or 3 worldies, even today, that 2 late goals as well. They're slightly unlucky. If Rue's great shot had gone a bit lower instead of coming off the bar. So, you don't lose 6 straight matches by accident, but there is some potential there to say it wouldn't take a huge change of form and luck to get on a bit of a run.
Let's hope they can find it for their sakes sooner rather than later. On to our Ligue and snapshots, and I'll start with yourself, Eric. This week, what is we not spoken about that our fans should hear about?
Yeah, I just, we have talked about them a little bit in the past, but I do want to emphasize the job that Lille are seeming to do. Shaking off those losses of Mothiba, who really seemed to be a nice focal point for that attack, Yassine Benzia, Anwar El Ghazi. That team looked really sharp, less so El Ghazi, but particularly with Benzia and Mothiba in the lineup to start the season. But they don't seem to have batted an eye. They won 2 straight. They're scoring freely. Rifanch has really looked good as the new striker there. I think that Jose Fonch and Sumoro are forming a pretty solid defensive partnership as well. I think some of these younger players, particularly Fode Bellatore, who had very little time for last season, has really started to come on in a really impressive way as well. Salik, the right back, they really haven't missed. Again, replacing Kevin Malqui. I don't really think that Lille are missing players like they thought they would, but I think that it's impressive, and I don't see. This team, depth is an issue. I think that's but you do have the likes of Luis Araujo and Thiago Maia with Remy on the bench. You have young defender Dabila as well. Egrae. I think there can be potentially a lot to come from this Lille side. I'm not saying they're a lock for Europe or anything, but I think much in the way that the likes of a Nantes or a Montpellier, who themselves had a pretty good weekend, continue to battle for Europe into the very end of the season. I think that could be a position in which Lille could find themselves come April and May.
It's a great start for Galtier, doing a exciting football for once. This is a turn of events. Rich, what's your Ligue 1 snapshot?
I'll keep mine quite brief. It's back to Guingamp for me, and perhaps an ominous sign for Comboiré is that during the game today, the Cop Rouge, who are the biggest, oldest, and probably most fiercest Guingamp supporters group, put out a banner, which witty to an extent, but perhaps a sign that the end could be nigh for Comboiré, with the banner reading that Antoine, as with golf, when it's not going well, you must change club. Which, I mean, the Guingamp have obviously had an affinity with their managers. They adored Gourvenec for what he did with the club. Things started well for Comboiré, but when the big supporters groups, and one as big and as influential as the Cop Rouge is with Guingamp, start to turn on you, then it's probably a sign that things are not going to end well.
Yeah, that's a knock at the door from death, isn't it? More than anything, from the sounds of things. Jez, what's your Ligue 1 snapshot?
Believe it or not, mine was exactly the same as Rich's, so I'm gonna have to think of something else, man. I mentioned him earlier. I'm going to go with Yanis Saliba for Saint-Etienne, who had a goal rightly disallowed because he was about 3 centimetres offside. But the goal, if it had stood, would have been fantastic. The way he brought the ball on, a long ball over the top, under control, and after that, the finish was more or less a formality. But it was a fantastic piece of control. And there are, there's a few well-known goals that never were. It's definitely worth looking up Michel Platini's sometime, which is absolutely fantastic, and a disgrace that it wasn't given for Juventus a few years back. Saliba's wasn't quite as good as that, but it definitely could go onto one of those lists of top class goals that sadly will never actually grace the history books.
The Ligue 1 snapshot for myself is a team that surprised me over the last couple of weeks and are unbeaten now since the opening day of the season. That's Montpellier, best defence in the league yet again, with 4 goals. The Paris Saint-Germain's conceding one today has put them top of the tree in that regard. They may have only scored 6 goals, but they're Zakarianing things, as you might want to call it at the moment, with 1-0 wins and halting the slight upturn in that Nice have had recently and comfortably into 3rd place in the table, which is something you can't really grumble at for the team down there. They're playing good, solid defensive football. We did worry with Mukiele and Roussillon going. Would they still be strong at the back? Would they lose a lot of creativity from there? They don't really need much creativity from the looks of things. And then looking at games ahead, Caen, Nîmes, Guingamp, Bordeaux, Toulouse, Nantes. Although Nantes is in the cup, obviously, there's plenty of gaps for them until November time to build up a head of steam to prove those potential relegation candidate tags are very much in the incorrect column. That's all for this week. My thanks to Eric, Rich, and Jez, along with all of you listening at home. Do join us for the preview show on Thursday, and the main show will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt, and goodbye.